Children of Nix, tonight you wake up in Boston, January 15th, 1919. The good news, the air smells deliciously like gingerbread, warm, sweet, nostalgic, the kind of scent that wraps around you like your grandmother's quilt, that transports you instantly to childhood kitchens and holiday memories. The bad news, it's because 2 million gallons of molasses are about to explode through your neighborhood at 35 miles an hour, a viscous tsunami bearing down on unsuspecting souls. No, this isn't a fairy tale or some fever dream conjured from the depths of your darkest imaginings. It's history's most bizarre and sticky disaster, the Great Molasses Flood. It's lunchtime, around 12:30 p.m. The city is alive with midday energy. You're a dock worker with calloused hands and salt-stained clothes, or perhaps a shopkeeper arranging your wares in a storefront window, or maybe just a kid playing hooky down by the harbor, your schoolbooks abandoned in favor of adventure. Boston's North End is humming along like any normal Wednesday afternoon, workers calling to each other in a babble of languages, wagons rumbling and creaking over cobblestone streets, worn smooth by decades of passage, distant church bells softly chiming the half-hour, their bronze voices floating over rooftops. You're bundled up because it's bitterly cold, even by January standards, the kind of cold that infiltrates your bones and makes your joints ache. The air bites your cheeks until they're raw and crimson. Your breath puffs white in front of your face, like the ghost of your words. But there's something odd. A subtle wrongness permeates the familiar scene. You glance at the looming steel tank that's been sitting ominously on commercial streets since 1915, a constant brooding presence in the neighborhood. The late morning sun glints off this towering steel tank of molasses, 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide, the height of a 5-story building squatting at the water's edge. You remember when it first went up, towering over the docks, a monstrous iron beast meant to store molasses for rum production and wartime explosives. The tank has always been a neighborhood curiosity, a hulking sentinel watching over daily life. It's always leaked a bit, this metal giant, molasses dripping down its rusty sides in amber tears, attracting swarms of flies in summer, freezing into hard, sugary icicles in winter that catch the sunlight like strange crystalline growths. Local kids would scoop it up with dirty fingers, a risky treat for anyone brave enough to get close to the metal behemoth. And the owners, United States Industrial Alcohol, would simply repaint it brown to hide the drips, a cosmetic solution to a structural problem. After all, it's easier to paint over mistakes than fix them, a philosophy that will soon exact a terrible price. Around you, the neighborhood is alive with the rhythms of immigrant life. Vendors shout in rapid-fire Italian, horses clip-clop on cobblestone with a sound like irregular heartbeats, and the air is heavy with the scent of salt water and something sugary. Molasses from the nearby warehouse seeping into every crevice of the neighborhood. It's a deceptively warm winter day after weeks of brutal cold. The temperature has risen from frigid single digits to an almost balmy 40 degrees in just a few days. You've loosened your scarf, unbuttoned your heavy coat, and you feel an odd sweetness in the air, a sticky hint of danger coating your tongue with each breath. Imagine breathing that sweet, yeasty smell that locals would say lingered for years afterward, embedded in the very brick and mortar of the buildings, impossible to wash away, just like the memories of what's about to happen. Today, though, something feels different. The tank seems to be groaning, shifting subtly, as if awakening from a long slumber. There's a rumbling, faint at first, like distant thunder, or perhaps a subway train passing far below. But there's not a cloud in the winter blue sky. The sounds of horses' hooves and children's shouts fade away as your attention fixes on the strange noises emanating from the tank. Suddenly, before you can puzzle it out, A roar louder than any thunderclap you've heard splits the air, a sound that seems to physically strike you. You freeze, your heart thudding in your chest like a trapped animal. The steel giant, the massive tank, is collapsing in front of your eyes, metal rivets popping like gunshots, the walls buckling and folding in on themselves. You have seconds, no, fractions of seconds, to comprehend what's happening before disaster strikes. The tank explodes with a force that reverberates through your chest cavity, releasing a tsunami of thick, dark molasses. Not the gentle ooze from your breakfast table, but a cataclysmic wave with the weight of a freight train. The wave rises higher than 2 stories, a wall of syrup taller than the buildings themselves, blotting out the sun as it crests. And it's headed straight for you, a rolling apocalypse of sugar and iron fragments. It moves impossibly fast. Later estimates clock it around 35 miles per hour. Faster than a man can run, faster than a horse can gallop, faster than your brain can process the impossibility of what your eyes are witnessing. You're caught completely off guard because, after all, it's just molasses. How could something so slow, so sweet, so innocuous be dangerous? But this isn't the slow trickle of pancake syrup or the gentle pour from a tin. This molasses weighs 26 million pounds, a gravity-driven hammer made of sugar with the destructive force of a locomotive. It tears buildings off their foundations with a sound like giant trees snapping in a hurricane, crushing brick, wood, and steel as if they were cardboard houses in a child's playset. Horses and wagons vanish into the sticky darkness, with terrified whinnies cut brutally short. People around you scream, their voices quickly silenced as they're caught in a tide so powerful they disappear instantly beneath its surface, swallowed by the sweet abyss. You stumble backward, your feet slipping in the cold muck already seeping into the streets like dark blood. Your escape is futile, the wave is too fast, too massive. You're knocked down, dragged under the flood, your world instantly transformed into a suffocating darkness. It doesn't feel soft or gentle like you might imagine. It feels brutal, like being trapped in wet concrete that's slowly hardening around you. Every movement is an exhausting battle against a substance that clings and pulls and drags. Your mouth and nose fill with sweetness, chokingly sweet, nauseatingly thick, coating your throat and lungs with each desperate gasp. You gasp, struggling for air as your chest heaves against the impossible pressure. Each attempt to swim or stand only sucks you deeper into this syrupy quicksand, your limbs growing heavier with each passing second. Then, mercifully, you slam into something solid, a wagon overturned by the wave, floating like driftwood in a molasses sea. You cling to it, gasping, coughing, your lungs burning as you expel the sticky substance, trying desperately to stay conscious as the wave surges past you. The air fills with cacophony, cries for help that grow increasingly desperate, the snap and groan of buildings collapsing like dying beasts, horses neighing in panic, the distant bells still tolling softly, mockingly, above the chaos, marking time as if this were any ordinary day. When the tide finally recedes, leaving destruction in its wake, you're coated from head to toe in a substance that's already beginning to harden in the cold air. You're gasping, each breath a victory, stuck fast to debris like an insect in amber. Your clothes are saturated, your hair plastered to your skull, your eyes burning from the sugar. You're lucky. You're alive, a survivor of an absurdity turned tragedy. Many aren't so fortunate. 21 people lose their lives in this sticky catastrophe, their bodies found days later, preserved like ancient specimens in amber. More than 150 are injured, their wounds compounded by the difficulty of cleaning molasses from torn flesh. But the nightmare is only beginning. As you lay in the syrup-soaked rubble, Watching rescue workers wade through knee-deep molasses that slows their every movement, you realize something even worse. The molasses is already cooling in the January air, hardening into a concrete-like mass that traps victims, entombs bodies, and turns rescue efforts into a race against time and temperature. Horses stuck in the mire must be put down where they stand, unable to be freed from their sweet prison. Children walk the streets for weeks with tar-like shoes, their footsteps leaving sticky impressions that refuse to fade. The aftermath is a scene from some demented underworld. Buildings slumped at impossible angles, streets flowing with rivers of brown, rescue workers covered head to toe, looking like creatures from another world. The Boston harbor turns brown, stained by the outflow of molasses that kills fish and coats boats for miles around. The smell, that initially pleasant aroma of baking and sweetness, becomes cloying, overwhelming, inescapable. Residents will swear they can still smell molasses on hot summer days. Decades later, the disaster literally baked into the very fabric of the neighborhood. Children of Nyx, tonight isn't just a bizarre footnote in history, a strange tale to tell at parties. It's a lesson in greed, negligence, and the catastrophic consequences of cutting corners. It's about a company that built a tank without proper oversight, that ignored warnings of leaks and structural weaknesses, that valued profit over safety until disaster made the ledgers irrelevant. So settle in, because we're only just scraping the sugary surface of this tale. From courtroom dramas where industrial America finally faced accountability, to secret engineering flaws revealed too late, from tragic, personal stories of lives snapped in an instant to the complex physics of syrup tsunamis that still fascinate scientists today. We've got it all, and, spoiler alert, it only gets stickier from here. As we delve into the dark underbelly of American industrialization, where the sweet taste of profit masked the bitter reality of human cost. World powers have been grinding at each other for 5 years. The gears of international conflict oiled with blood and ambition, and molasses, that thick, dark byproduct of Caribbean sugarcane, has become an unexpected goldmine in this global machinery of death. This isn't just any sweetener languishing in kitchen cupboards. Molasses can be fermented into ethanol, transforming the sticky substance into rum for sailors' solace, or industrial alcohol for munitions that tear through flesh and fortification alike. In fact, during World War I, the United States Industrial Alcohol, USIA, company, the corporate parent of Purity Distilling, transformed Caribbean molasses into the fuel and explosives that fed America's war machine with mechanical efficiency. It was incredibly profitable, obscenely so, as industrial alcohol became the beating heart of war manufacturing, pumping wealth into corporate coffers while bodies piled up an ocean away. You imagine smug tycoons in wool suits and silk ties, their faces flushed with satisfaction, counting profits by the freight car in oak-paneled boardrooms, while factory whistles scream their industrial hymns above those same tracks you're standing on. The air vibrates with the metallic song of machinery and money-changing hands. Back then, the company's board literally tasted the sweet payoff with every quarterly report. DuPont alone reported $57 million net in 1915 from explosives, an astronomical sum that would exceed $1 billion in today's dollars, their ledgers black with profit while European fields turned red. Across the harbor from the financial district's marble columns, Boston's Italian-American North End pulses as an energetic hub of immigrants and industry, its narrow streets teeming with life and struggle. In just a few decades, the neighborhood has swelled beyond capacity. By 1897, some 18,000 Italians lived here, crammed into tenements that stand shoulder to shoulder like weary laborers at the end of a long shift. The buildings seem to lean against each other for support, windows open even in winter to release the steam of cooking and humanity within. These immigrants bustle in tenements near North Station, the railroad's constant rumble a bass line to their daily symphony. They work in shipyards with hands raw from salt water and rope, in brickyards where clay dust coats their lungs, haul freight with backs curved before their time, and at day's end crowd into small cafes for espresso that reminds them of homes left behind across an ocean. Strangers and city officials dismissively call it Little Italy, a label that flattens complexity into stereotype. But to you it feels like a vibrant village of nonni, with faces creased like ancient maps and bright-eyed ragazzi, all shouting over steaming plates of pasta and the persistent whine of streetcars. The air here is a rich mingling of garlic and coal smoke, coffee and sweat, hope and resignation. These families know hard work, the kind that leaves hands calloused and spirits undimmed. They also know hardship intimately. Nearly 60% of the Italian-born residents here remain non-citizens, their legal status as tenuous as their economic security, with little political clout to demand safety considerations or government protection. Their voices, accented with the musical cadences of Naples and Sicily, go unheard in the halls of power. In that climate of booming war profits and expendable immigrant labor, corners are cut with the efficiency of a tailor's shears, and warnings go unheeded like prayers whispered into a hurricane. To meet insatiable wartime demand and cut out middlemen who might siphon profits, USIA and Purity Distilling built their own molasses tank here in 1915, a monument to industrial expediency. You can picture it being erected hurriedly, with the frantic energy of greed masked as patriotic duty. 4 years before the war's end, iron plates rolled into place on flatbed wagons, workers riveting the sides around the clock in shifts that blurred day into night, their hammers striking a relentless rhythm to meet a December 1915 deadline. Sparks shower from metal against metal, illuminating exhausted faces in brief, golden bursts. The tank rises daily, a behemoth taking shape against the harbour skyline. The completed tank is a breathtaking monument to ambition and hubris. 2.3 million gallons capacity, that's roughly 60 modern tanker trucks filled to bursting, towering over 50 feet high, taller than a 4-story building, with a vast circular base spreading like an ink stain across the waterfront. It's like a monstrous industrial cauldron built to feed the distillery next door in Cambridge via pipeline, a steel stomach digesting sugar into the acids of war. The plan, elegant in its corporate simplicity, is to land molasses by ship at Copp's Hill Wharf, where vessels from Cuba and the Caribbean islands dock, heavy with sweet cargo, pump it into this steel Goliath that dominates the skyline, and then pipe it off to make rum for sailors or fuel for the machines that will supposedly end all wars. On paper it sounds smart, efficient, profitable, a triumph of American industrial ingenuity. In practice, it's a catastrophe patiently waiting to happen, disaster held back by nothing more than inadequate rivets and corporate hubris. From the beginning, the tank displays worrying quirks that should have been red flags. On this same street where you now stand, wide-eyed children with dirt-smudged faces scoop molasses oozing from its seams into small tin pails, their hands sticky with what should be contained. Locals joke that you can catch your cookie to it like flypaper, humor masking the obvious danger leaking into their streets. Passers-by notice puddles forming around its base on hot days, the ground perpetually tacky underfoot, attracting swarms of flies that create a buzzing halo around the structure. Insiders, speaking in hushed tones in pubs after hours, say the builders ignored engineering best practices to save money, cutting corners with the same efficiency they cut costs. In fact, modern analysis shows the steel walls are only half as thick as they should be, even by 1915 standards, like trying to contain an ocean with a paper cup. Engineers later note the metal lacks manganese, making it brittle and vulnerable to the slightest stress, like a baton snapped easily by a child where it should bend and flex. You imagine the tank's walls, seemingly solid but secretly fragile, hiding their weakness beneath a coat of paint and corporate assurances. Worse yet, many rivets were driven cold, not heated first as proper technique demands, so they shear out with terrifying ease when under pressure. You imagine massive iron bolts popping like buttons from an overstrained shirt, shearing like stale pretzel sticks under the immense pressure of the molasses they contain. The cacophony must have been audible, metal protesting its mistreatment with groans and pings that echoed across the harbour, warnings dismissed as normal settling or the sounds of a city at work. The tank has leaked persistently from day one. To cover up this glaring flaw, the owners painted it brown, hiding evidence of structural failure beneath cosmetic solutions. Now it looks like a giant rusted soda can, its slick sides always a little stained, dripping its contents like a wounded beast slowly bleeding out. The mood in early 1919 is oddly tense, stretched tight as a violin string about to snap. The Great War ended November 1918, jubilant celebrations fading into the uncertainty of peacetime economy. But the tank's builders and owners aren't celebrating peace with the same enthusiasm as the returning soldiers. You overhear whispers in offices and loading docks. Tomorrow, January 16th, Congress will ratify the 18th Amendment to ban alcohol nationwide, legislation that would torpedo Purity's lucrative rum business with the efficiency of a German U-boat. Prohibition looms like an executioner's axe over their profit margins. So today they're running the plant 24/7, machinery screaming in protest, workers stumbling through double shifts, racing to fill orders before their product becomes contraband. The very day before the disaster, Boston experienced a sudden, dramatic warm spell. Temperatures have jumped from below zero to the balmy 40s in just 2 days, a meteorological whiplash that put stress on everything from water pipes to human sinuses. The molasses inside the tank, earlier frozen hard as taffy, solid enough that workers could walk on its surface, has now thawed and expanded with alarming rapidity, pressing against the walls of its insufficient container like a prisoner testing the bars of a cell. A warm new shipment of molasses, steamed on board to keep it flowing in its journey from Havana, was pumped into the already stressed tank just hours ago, adding heat and volume to the unstable mixture. Workers speak nervously of low growls and creaks emanating from the tank as it filled, the sounds of metal under duress, like a beast stirring from slumber. Some claim to have seen the tank's sides bulging outward, swelling like a poisoned thing. The air vibrates with tension. A city ready for celebration at war's end. Workers dreaming of peacetime prosperity, but the monster tank grows uneasy, straining at its seams, a disaster preparing to birth itself into the world. And then midday comes, the winter sun hanging pale in a clear sky. For an hour, you, the workers and Italian school kids on their lunch break, walk through unexpected sunshine to enjoy a brief respite from daily labors. You step outside the paving yards where stone dust coats every surface, past the firehouse where brass poles gleam in anticipation of emergencies yet to come, and near the Purity offices where clerks in high collars tally figures that translate suffering into profit. There's light-hearted talk of upcoming weddings and prohibition jokes circulating among workers, sharing cigarettes and thermoses of coffee, momentarily forgetting the brooding presence looming over their neighborhood. A lookout, perhaps a police officer at his post, standing straight-backed against the winter chill, Or maybe a harbour watchman scanning for incoming vessels sees a train rumble by on elevated tracks, its wheels striking a rhythmic counterpoint to the harbour's gentle slosh against the docks. Suddenly the ground rolls under your boots like a ship's deck in high seas. A sound like thunder, but deeper, more mechanical, a deep, guttural roar that seems to emanate from the earth itself, fills the street, bouncing between buildings until direction becomes meaningless. You freeze in mid-step. At first you think it's the elevated train derailing above your head, imagination flashing to images of twisted metal and screaming passengers. Maybe it is, your mind racing to make sense of the senseless until a sickening crack cuts through the air like a giant's whip, silencing all other sounds in its wake. That sound, that singular, terrible sound, is the beginning of the end, the moment when physics and corporate neglect conspire to write a tragedy in molasses across a neighborhood of people who never had a say in the danger looming above their heads. In that fraction of a second between the crack and what comes next, you exist in the liminal space between the world as it was and the sticky nightmare it's about to become. It's about 12:30 p.m. You're on Commercial Street, seconds from tragedy, unaware that these mundane moments, checking your pocket watch, adjusting your scarf, contemplating lunch options, are the last normal breaths you'll take before your world transforms. The sky above is sharp blue, crystalline and cloudless, the kind of winter perfection that makes Bostonians briefly forgive the season's cruelties. The sun feels unexpectedly warm on your shoulders, a January gift that has drawn people outdoors, children released from school for lunch hour, workers stepping outside to savor the unseasonable warmth, all of you unwittingly gathering as witnesses to impending disaster. Then something shifts in the urban symphony around you. A sound rumbles underfoot, different from the familiar rhythm of the elevated train that regularly thunders overhead. This is deeper, more primal, as if the earth itself is groaning. Windows rattle in their frames like chattering teeth, glass panes vibrating with increasing intensity. The tank's steel seams groan against a new weight, the sound of metal under impossible strain, like a suspension bridge in high wind. You look up at the massive cylinder, and for a heartbeat, time seems to pause. The tank appears to be breathing, its sides expanding and contracting almost imperceptibly, as if some great beast were waking within. And then, deafening bang, so loud it feels physical, striking your chest like a hammer. Bolts shear off like champagne corks popping at a grotesque celebration, screaming through the air while trailing sparks that flash like fireflies in broad daylight. The rivets shoot out in machine gun staccato, deadly projectiles peppering buildings and streetcars, embedding themselves in wood and brick and flesh. Metal walls disintegrate before your eyes, peeling away like the skin of an overripe fruit. The tank's bottom seems to explode outward with a force that defies comprehension, a geyser of brown shooting under buildings, lifting their foundations as if they were dollhouses being rearranged by a careless child. In a heartbeat, the ordered world dissolves into chaos. Black and white dray horses rear on hind legs, eyes rolling white with terror, their instincts screaming danger before human minds can process what's happening. One teamster's wagon is flung into a building with the casual violence of a child's toy tossed across a room, the wood splintering on impact, the horse's panicked whinny cut brutally short. The cobblestones beneath your feet seem to ripple like water. The solid ground suddenly untrustworthy, betraying everything you've been taught about the stability of the physical world. From your vantage point, frozen in place, muscles locked with disbelief. The horror unfolds with surreal clarity and devastating speed. A towering wave of opaque, burning sugary fluid surges outward from the ruptured tank, like a tsunami born of nightmares rather than oceans. It resembles chocolate lava, 25 feet tall at the crest, a roiling wall of liquid destruction. But it's darker, nearly black in places, with a viscous texture that seems almost alive, grasping and pulling at everything it touches. And it smells sweet, sickeningly sweet, like rotten bananas and fermenting beer mixed together, an odor so intense you can taste it coating your tongue, filling your nostrils with cloying sweetness that makes your stomach lurch in protest. You can almost feel the pressure in that wave pushing air before it. Witnesses later say it felt like being hit by a wall of wind first, a hurricane precursor that stole the breath from lungs, then the sticky flood itself following with inexorable purpose. In the immediate moment, suspended between comprehension and terror, you have a flash of disbelief, the rational part of your mind rebelling against the evidence of your senses. How can molasses explode? It doesn't. It pours, it flows, it oozes with glacial patience. Except this time it's an avalanche with the force of a locomotive, defying everything you thought you knew about the substance. The laws of physics seem temporarily suspended, as if the universe itself has gone mad. The wave crashes into everything in its path with methodical devastation. An Atlantic Avenue elevated train structure, built to withstand Boston winters and the weight of fully loaded rail cars, groans under the molasses weight as if in physical pain. Steel girder meets goo in an unequal battle. The tank's own panels, now deadly projectiles, slam into tracks with the force of battering rams, bending them backwards like wire hangers in strong hands. Buildings shudder from their foundations to their rooftops. Doors and windows on the ground floor implode with sudden violence, glass shards mixing with the brown tide to create a slurry as treacherous as any battlefield. In front of Firehouse 31, where firefighters were enjoying their lunch break in the winter sun, at least one fire engine gets upended like a child's toy, its bright red paint disappearing beneath the molasses tide. The Boston Post's headline later would read, "Huge molasses tank explodes in North End," the journalists reaching for familiar vocabulary to describe the unprecedented. But there was no bomb found, no sabotage, despite early accusations. This was simply a catastrophic collapse, a failure of engineering oversight and corporate responsibility playing out in slow motion across a neighborhood that never had a say in the danger positioned in their midst. You try to step back, muscles finally responding to your brain's panicked commands, but it's too late. The molasses floods the street at about 35 miles per hour, faster than any human can run, faster than you can process what's happening. It's a furious, boiling rush that seems to defy gravity, climbing walls and rushing around corners with terrifying intelligence, as if hunting for victims. And it's already here, the sweet stench filling your nostrils seconds before the substance itself surrounds you, rising to your knees in an instant, then your waist, the cold, sticky mass seeping through your clothes, adhering to your skin. In one terrifying instant that will replay in your nightmares for decades to come, you see a 10-year-old boy off school for lunch hour, Anthony DiStasio, walking with his sisters along the street. 1 second they're laughing about a snowball fight from earlier, their cheeks flushed with winter cold and childish delight. The next, the sticky wall hoists Anthony off his feet with the impersonal violence of a natural disaster. He's airborne, tumbling, his small body caught on the crest of the wave like a leaf in a storm. His sisters scream, the sound distorted by the roar of the molasses, their hands reaching uselessly toward their brother as they too are engulfed. You watch in horrified slow motion. The molasses carries the child past you and plunks him down like a pebble onto the street as the wave retreats, leaving him in its wake. He lies there, smeared in brown goo that covers every inch of his small frame, barely conscious, his chest heaving with labored breaths as the sticky substance clogs his nose and mouth. Around him, the family's frantic shouts are drowned by the roar of ongoing disaster. Parents calling for children, children crying for parents, neighbors shouting warnings that come too late. Anthony's sisters stagger toward him, unrecognizable beneath their coating of molasses, moving like creatures from a nightmare, arms outstretched. The scene unfolds with terrible clarity, a horse trapped chest-deep in the thickening mass, struggling with diminishing strength until it simply stops, its eyes reflecting a final terror. A man in a business suit, perhaps an office worker or a salesman, clawing at his face as molasses fills his mouth and nostrils, his movements growing weaker by the second. A woman holding an infant above her head as she sinks deeper into the morass, her determined face a study in maternal desperation. Firemen rushing toward the scene, only to be caught themselves in the sticky trap, their rescue attempts becoming a fight for their own survival. And you are caught in this tableau of horror, this moment frozen in amber, or rather, in molasses. The substance pulls at you, each movement requiring exponentially more effort than the last as the air grows cold again and the molasses begins to stiffen. Your clothes, soaked through with the substance, hang heavy on your frame. Every step, a battle against the relentless pull of this sweet-smelling quicksand. Your mind reels with the impossible transformation of the ordinary, a tank, a street, a warm winter day, into this landscape of devastation. In the distance you hear the first sirens wailing, help coming too late for many. The initial wave has passed, but its aftermath stretches before you, a neighborhood transformed into a dark, sticky wasteland where the wounded cry out and the dead lie silent beneath a blanket of industrial sweetness gone horribly wrong. The air, previously crisp with winter clarity, now hangs heavy with the smell of fermentation and disaster. Above, the January sun continues to shine indifferently on the scene, beginning to warm the molasses, making it temporarily more fluid before the night's cold will freeze it into a concrete-like mass, creating a second disaster for those trapped within its embrace. This is the moment when history pivots, when a neighborhood story splits into before and after, when the mundane dangers of industrial America reveal themselves in catastrophic clarity. This is the Great Molasses Flood of 1919, a disaster so bizarre it would seem comical if not for the bodies being pulled from the sweet, sticky darkness, if not for the children like Anthony who will carry the physical and psychological scars for decades to come, if not for the families who will spend weeks searching for loved ones buried in the most unlikely of graves. Now it's chaos. You find yourself knee-deep in cold, viscous sugar as the wave retreats, leaving devastation in its wake. All light dims to that sickly, brown translucence, as if the world itself has been submerged in amber. The bright winter day has vanished, replaced by a murky twilight filtered through a substance never meant to flood city streets. You can't run. Each desperate step feels like wading through warmed cement that grows more resistant with every passing second. The molasses clings to your legs with perverse affection, creating suction that threatens to pull you deeper with each movement. Your muscles scream in protest against this unnatural resistance, burning with effort, yet achieving little progress. Bystanders scream and struggle all around you, their voices distorted through the heavy air. You watch as one man's cap is yanked off his head by invisible hands sinking under the molasses as if pulled by malevolent spirits. Horses, panicked beyond reason, kick and neigh in frantic terror, their powerful bodies thrashing against the sticky trap, then scream their last horrible human-like screams as they're dragged under by the inexorable weight. You remember seeing a white dray horse's head vanish into the murk, its legs flailing in desperate arcs above the surface, before they too disappear, leaving only ripples in the brown sea to mark its passing. The image burns into your memory with terrible clarity, the animal's rolling eyes, its nostrils flared wide with fear, then nothing. Every breath is a labor, your chest fighting against the pressure of molasses on your ribs. The air itself seems thickened, weighted with particles of sugar and yeast. It tastes of vinegar and rot, fermenting sweetness that coats your tongue and throat with each gasping inhale. Your lungs feel coated with the stuff, each breath shallower than the last. The stench is overwhelming, not just the sickly sweetness, but something more primal beneath it, the smell of panic and death and industrial chemicals mixed with sugar, creating an odor unlike anything in natural experience. The moment after the wave crashes is surreal, suspended in time like a nightmare from which you cannot wake. You try to stand upright from where you've been knocked down, but your legs won't respond to your brain's commands. It's not just shock paralyzing you, though terror certainly courses through your veins like ice water. It's suction, physical, implacable suction. The molasses is thick, heavier than you could have possibly imagined, and growing colder now that it's spread out in the January air. It clings to you like wet tar, drawing your body down with a slow, inescapable grip that feels almost sentient in its determination. Your clothes, saturated with the substance, weigh as much as chainmail, dragging you downward with every passing second. People nearby scream for help, their voices cracking with desperation. Some are half submerged in the brown morass, waving molasses-covered arms that shine wetly in the winter sun. Others don't move at all, dark shapes beneath the surface that could be debris or something far worse. You try not to think about what lies beneath your feet in this sticky ocean, what might be brushing against your legs as you struggle towards something solid. Pieces of splintered wood, twisted iron railings and human debris whirl in the retreating flood like macabre offerings. A reporter's description will come later, words that capture the horror with brutal precision. Bodies, human or animal, were impossible to tell in the sticky mass. Only sudden thrashing and upheavals showed life. The distinction between the living and the dead, between flesh and wreckage, has been erased beneath this equalizing blanket of industrial sweetness. Everything is transformed, made unrecognizable by its coating of brown. You try to help those around you, driven by instinct and the need to do something, anything, in the face of incomprehensible disaster. Maybe it's your friend from the paving yard, Jack, who you spot pinned under a storefront sign that now floats like driftwood in the molasses sea. You reach for his arm but find only wet cloth that slips through your fingers, the person beneath it unresponsive to your calls. The molasses has a way of muffling sound, of deadening voices to distant echoes. You call his name again, but your voice seems to travel nowhere, absorbed by the viscous air around you. Another neighbor's wife stands nearby, calling out for her children with increasing hysteria, picking molasses out of her throat with shaking fingers, her face a mask of sticky brown through which only the whites of her terrified eyes are visible. Her hair is plastered to her skull, her dress heavy with absorption, but still she calls out names. "Maria! Antonio!" her voice growing hoarser with each desperate shout. You want to tell her to conserve her strength, but who are you to silence a mother's search? Everything and everyone is covered in the goo, identities obscured, humanity reduced to brown shapes moving with painful slowness through a transformed landscape. The mucilage clings to your clothes, your face, working its way into every fold of fabric, every wrinkle of skin, and it's cold, bitingly, surprisingly cold. The January air, temporarily warmed by that deceptive sunshine, is already cooling rapidly, and with it, the molasses begins to solidify. What was a flood is becoming a trap, a cement-like mass that hardens with each passing minute. You feel it stiffening around your legs, around your hands as you try to wipe it from your face. The cold amplifies the viscosity, transforming liquid disaster into solid prison. The wave, having spent its initial fury, piles up in corners and against buildings like snowdrifts from hell. At the intersection of Atlantic Avenue and Commercial Street, it surges toward the harbor in a secondary flow, dragging a freight car along the railway tracks as if it were a child's toy, the metal wheels shrieking against rails bent by the force of the flood. The car moves with dreamlike slowness now, pushed by molasses rather than steam, until it too comes to rest at an impossible angle, its cargo spilling out to join the general devastation. Debris is everywhere, transforming a once familiar neighborhood into an alien landscape. You see vehicles overturned like discarded toys, streetcars lifted completely off their tracks as if tossed by a giant's tantrum. A boxcar door swings open with glacial slowness, its own sticky cargo dripping out to join the flood, adding more sweetness to devastation. People shout directions through the din, their voices strangely muffled by the heavy air. Someone yells that the flood is half the width of a block wide and several feet deep in places, information that seems both precise and utterly useless in the face of so much chaos. By the time the wave finally subsides, spent of its terrible energy, Commercial Street has become a treacherous swamp of industrial waste and human suffering. Rescuers arrive within minutes, cops with their blue uniforms quickly stained brown, firemen still in their lunch-stained shirts, soldiers from the nearby Navy barracks in crisp uniforms that won't stay clean for long, but they too struggle to move through this unnatural battlefield. Their training has prepared them for fires, for building collapses, for riots, but not for this, not for a sea of molasses that clings to boots and equipment, that transforms rescue into a molasses-coated nightmare of frustration and increasing desperation. In the middle of the street, horses lie dead, their powerful bodies now still mountains in the brown landscape. Men and women, some reduced to muddy brown clumps of humanity, have been crushed against walls or drowned in substance that should sustain life, not take it. The final toll will be 21 dead and 150 injured, dozens more with broken bones from being slammed into buildings, or with scalding burns from steam pipes ruptured by the wave's force. The numbers are clinical, failing to capture the personal horror of each death, each injury. You know one kid from your block, Pasquale, with his gap-toothed smile and ever-present ball cap, is missing, last seen playing marbles near the tank just before noon. Another child, little Maria, with her dark braids and serious eyes, is pinned under a wooden beam that once supported a shop front. Her small face is barely visible through the brown coating, but her eyes are open, watching rescuers struggle toward her with agonizing slowness. Every touch you make is sticky. Your fingers adhere to whatever they contact, making the simplest task a struggle against adhesion. The smell of brown sugar and rot is everywhere, inescapable, infiltrating your nostrils, your mouth, your clothes. It will linger on you for days, for weeks. Some say the sweet stench never truly leaves those who survived this day. The temperature begins to drop precipitously as afternoon wears on, the brief January thaw retreating as rapidly as it arrived. Boston's sudden warmth that morning was a cruel fluke, and now the January chill returns with a vengeance, as if winter itself is reclaiming its territory with icy determination. The molasses, still several feet deep in places, begins to stiffen with increasing speed, its consistency changing before your eyes. Where it flowed like a deadly tide just an hour ago, it now sets like industrial concrete, entombing debris, bodies, and the injured alike in a sweet sarcophagus that resists all efforts at penetration. Rescuers work against time and temperature, knowing that each degree of dropping mercury makes their task exponentially more difficult. They wade through thickening molasses that clutches at their legs, that turns simple forward progress into exhausting labor. They shout to each other over the strange acoustics of the disaster site, where some sounds are muffled to nothing, while others carry with unusual clarity. They form human chains, passing victims hand to sticky hand toward safety, toward the hastily established medical station where doctors and nurses fight their own battle against wounds never covered in medical textbooks. The hardening molasses creates grotesque tableaus across the neighborhood. A pocket watch caught mid-swing from a vest pocket, frozen in brown translucence. A woman's hat with feather still attached, half submerged in what looks like solidifying caramel. A child's doll staring with glass eyes from a sweet prison. Time itself seems captured in amber, or rather in molasses, as the substance continues its transformation from liquid to solid, from disaster in motion to monument of tragedy. Night falls early, as it does in January, and with darkness comes new challenges. Floodlights are brought in, casting harsh shadows across the brown landscape, turning rescuers into silhouettes against artificial brightness. The molasses catches the light strangely, reflecting it in ways that create disorienting patterns, making depth perception treacherous. Workers chip away at hardened molasses with picks and shovels, the sound of metal striking sugar concrete creating a percussive backdrop to moans and shouts and urgent orders. You find yourself drafted into the rescue efforts, your clothes already ruined, your body already contaminated with sticky sweetness. What choice is there but to help? You join the line, passing buckets of hot water, the only substance that seems effective against the hardening molasses, from hand to hand. The water steams in the cold night air, creating a fog that hangs over the disaster site like a shroud. The molasses melts reluctantly where the water touches it, releasing its victims inch by grudging inch. As you work through the night, the full scope of the disaster begins to emerge from the sticky darkness. This isn't just a spill or an accident. It's a catastrophe born of negligence, of corporate indifference, of profit valued over safety. The tank that seemed such a fixture of the neighborhood, that leaked its contents onto the streets as a daily reminder of its presence, has exacted a terrible price for being ignored. The sweet substance that flavored cookies and candies, that fermented into rum and industrial alcohol, has transformed into an agent of death, revealing the thin veneer between everyday life and unimaginable disaster. Dawn will come eventually, bringing with it a new day of recovery, of identification, of grief. But this night belongs to the molasses, to its victims, and to those fighting against time and cold and sweet-smelling death to save whoever can still be saved from this most bizarre and tragic of disasters. Antonio Di Stasio had just turned 10. He and his sister Maria were walking home when the tank burst. They had just passed the firehouse on Commercial Street, just seconds before the explosion. Molasses caught up with them in an instant. Maria was killed, her small frame thrown against a lamppost. Antonio survived, but he never spoke again. Trauma silenced him. The flood had stolen his sister and his voice in one blow. Antonio was one of many immigrant children living in the North End, a neighborhood densely packed with Italians, Irish, Portuguese and others working-class families scraping by. Most had no idea what the tank even held, let alone that it posed a threat. They weren't told. No warning signs, no fencing, no posted hazard labels. This was a neighborhood of laborers, dockhands, carpenters, cobblers. They didn't question the looming steel drum above them because they weren't supposed to. That's how industry worked in 1919. What mattered was output, not oversight. Production, not protection. You might be wondering, how does molasses, thick, slow molasses, destroy a city block? It's physics. When that tank exploded, 2.3 million gallons of molasses were released in seconds. That's 12,000 tons of fluid. And although molasses flows slowly at room temperature, the fresh batch delivered the day before was warm, heated during transport. The sudden release into the cool Boston air created a volatile shift. The molasses initially surged, unimpeded with terrifying speed. It behaved like a flash flood. At 35 mph, it had kinetic energy equivalent to a freight train. The density of molasses is about 1.4 times that of water, and with that volume, the wave had unstoppable momentum. It plowed through buildings, lifted train cars off their rails, demolished a steel-framed firehouse. Then the temperature dropped, the molasses thickened. What flowed in seconds now trapped bodies for hours. Firefighters used axes to reach victims. Rescuers suffocated while trying to pull others free. It was like a battlefield, but with sugar instead of shrapnel. Let's talk about Engine Company 31. It sat directly in the path of the wave. The building collapsed almost instantly. Inside, fireman George Leahy was buried alive. Rescuers heard his voice through the rubble and tried desperately to reach him. It took hours. They dug with bare hands, shovels, even borrowed planks. When they finally got to him, it was too late. Captain John McManus, another firefighter, barely survived. He was hurled through the second floor and thrown into a nearby wall. Covered in molasses and debris, he dragged himself out with broken ribs and bleeding hands. The men of Engine 31 became reluctant heroes of the flood, their tragedy emblematic of a system that never warned them of what sat beside their station. What caused the explosion? It wasn't sabotage, despite early rumors. The war had just ended, and fears of anarchists and foreign agitators were everywhere. But no, it wasn't a bomb, it was physics, metal fatigue, and human greed. The tank had been rushed into service in 1915 to meet the rising demand for industrial alcohol. Wartime contracts were lucrative, and USIA didn't want delays. The engineer hired to design it wasn't certified. The company skipped pressure testing. In fact, workers later admitted that when the tank was filled, it groaned so loudly they could hear it from blocks away. Molasses leaked from its seams constantly. Children would collect the drops in tin cups. The company's response? Paint the tank brown to hide the leaks. A week before the disaster, a fresh shipment had arrived. Warm molasses pumped in quickly. It strained the tank to its limit. Some say fermentation might have played a role too, building up pressure as gases formed inside. The final stress proved too much. Help arrives in minutes, though it feels like hours. Through the murk, you spot rescuers, Red Cross volunteers, wearing grey uniforms and white collars, splashing into the sludge. In one striking image from that day, debutantes turned nurses plunge hip-deep in molasses. They crawl over bodies, handing out hot coffee and brandy to anyone conscious. Even the city's pigeons fall victim. White birds swoop down into the brown flood to peck at what they think is spilled food. Then their feathers darken and they wobble and crash. You catch sight of a few children stumbling through the shallows, faces smeared with molasses but alive, dazed but alive. One man, a North End policeman named Michael Polson or Tommy Byrne, accounts vary, swings into action after he hears someone shout from atop a lamppost. He hooks the mic on his corner box and reports in a thick Boston accent, "Holy Mother of God, something terrible has happened." Workhorse teams and steam sirens have arrived. Hoses are straining to hurl water, though it mostly floats off the viscous pavement. A fireboat pumps seawater into the harbour to flush the gunk. You see a volunteer, a sheriff's deputy maybe, wrestling a horse to safety with leather straps. The animal's coat is caked brown. It snorts and gallops off, neighing as if proclaiming the absurdity of surviving a molasses baptism. Inside buildings, survivors are emerging. In the stairwell of a bakery, a baker who had been sleeping in the cellar wakes up choking on molasses vapor. He coughs and finds the staircase blocked by brown waves. Another worker from Purity Distilling clambers out of a wrenching heap of metal. A family from Copp's Hill emerges, sobbing for their lost relative, but grateful they all made it. Out at sea, a tugboat crew senses the havoc long before shore. The harbour water turned brown for blocks. Fishermen report smelling molasses for years after. Emergency rooms are overwhelmed. Doctors and nurses scrub faces of brown, counting concussions and lacerations. One thing is unanimous. Everyone is sticky. They'll later joke, "I got more wet than at any other flood. The ambulances arrived and they were gooey." They used sand to try to absorb it, hoping to make some traction underfoot. Meanwhile, on Commercial Street, the cleanup is only beginning. At least 3 days of searching are needed to find all the victims. Because of the muck, rescuers can't even identify some bodies at first. They're glazed over by molasses. The Clufferty family is found huddled together in their collapsed home. 2 children dead, 1 alive. Plaster men dig and pump. Workers even camp out for days, turning the corner itself into a makeshift corral for the living and the dead. In a moment of grim humour, one rescuer quips that everything in Boston is sticky. The floors, the telephones, the coffee cups. And he's not entirely wrong. Despite the terror, small kindnesses flicker. Neighbours hand out blankets. Shopkeepers distribute hot toddies. A priest hears confessions of people who crawled on their knees through brown soup to rescue others. You can't help but notice courage and care rise in the same floodwaters as fear and sorrow. You would think water would wash it away. It didn't. Crews tried using salt water from the harbour, hoping to dilute the molasses. It barely worked. Sand was poured on the streets for traction. They even used sawdust to soak up the goo. But every bootstep just spread the mess further. Horses sank and had to be shot. Trains were delayed for days. The harbour itself turned brown. The fish died. Locals said you could smell molasses on warm days for decades. It clung to everything: doors, walls, boots, even the feathers of passing birds. Some cleanup workers vomited from the overwhelming sweetness, their bodies rejecting the unnatural concentration of sugar. It wasn't just gross, it was grief-stained, trauma-sweetened rot. As dawn breaks days later, Boston wakes to the true aftermath: chaos and outrage. The flood has swallowed businesses, railroad tracks, and an entire fire station. Newspapers splatter sticky photos of flattened houses and gooey sidewalks. People want answers and someone to blame. Investigations begin almost immediately. Purity Distilling and USIA executives insist on a bomb theory. Maybe anarchists, they say, planted one. After all, the Red Scare is already swelling across America. Workers at the plant had reported seeing Bolshevik graffiti in the neighborhood. Could revolutionaries have bombed the tank? More sensationally, folks whisper about fermentation. Maybe the warming temperatures spurred a drunken internal explosion. But chemists quickly debunk that. The truth is far more mundane and chilling. The tank simply was not built for this job. It was an engineering disaster. 119 residents of the North End sue in a gigantic class action case against USIA. It's one of the first mass tort cases in the country, a legal milestone. Court transcripts are filled with analysis. They test the steel thickness, finding the plates often only half an inch, far thinner than safety specs. Examine the limestone in the rivets, grill supervisors about ignored warnings like the infamous groaning noises Arthur Gell, the USIA treasurer, reportedly dismissed as nothing. Even the children's molasses leaks become evidence. For 6 sticky years the trials drag on, roughly 3,000 witnesses, packed courtrooms. Factories produce smears of molasses as exhibits. One engineer explains that filling the tank with water should have been tested more than once. Gell, with no engineering background, had only done a half-hearted water test and said nothing leaked. Neighbors testify that each fill of the tank made it creak and bulge. Ultimately, the legal floodgates burst against USIA. The judge finds the factor of safety in the tank was dangerously low. The law is clear: this was negligence. USIA and Purity are found liable for failing to build a tank strong enough to hold what they asked it to hold. The company ends up settling. In total, they pay between $500,000 and $1 million in damages, the equivalent of at least $11 million today. Each family of the 21 dead eventually gets about $7,000. The funeral for one life cost more than that. In the courtroom, even USIA's color morphs from righteous to guilty. Their romantic tale of a bomb is ridiculed. Instead, engineers show films of failed tanks, compare rivet drills, and quote municipal inspectors who predicted this collapse. The city's sigh of relief is a grim one. Justice, if measured in settlements, has been served. Many hail it as a victory for workers and immigrants who had been ignored. It was the largest class action suit in Massachusetts at the time. Victims banded together and sued USIA. The company tried everything to shift blame. They blamed anarchists, they blamed weather, they even suggested that someone must have planted a bomb. But investigators found no such evidence. They did find poor construction records, warnings ignored, and structural flaws. Engineers testifying for the victims said the tank walls were too thin. The steel had too little manganese, making it brittle. After 5 years, the court ruled against USIA. They were ordered to pay $628,000 in damages, equivalent to around $10 million today. It was a landmark victory for victims of corporate negligence. The Great Molasses Flood changed more than just Boston's North End. It transformed the way cities regulated industry. Before the flood, companies built what they wanted, how they wanted. Afterward, cities began enforcing inspections. Engineers had to be certified. Public safety began to matter. And the story stuck. It became folklore, something schoolchildren in Massachusetts still learn. A strange, sticky tragedy that seems almost too weird to be real until you read the names of the dead, until you visit the site, until you smell sugar on the wind. But that's not where it ends. Because every time a chemical plant leaks, every time a mine collapses, every time we let profits outweigh people, the molasses flood comes back. It's a warning, a sweet-smelling one. Children of Nyx, as we delve deeper into the sticky annals of history, the Great Molasses Flood of 1919 reveals layers of human tragedy, scientific intrigue, and societal transformation. Let's continue our journey through the aftermath, the personal stories, and the lasting impact of this peculiar disaster. The molasses flood didn't just claim lives, it left indelible marks on survivors. Harold Dawley, a Winchester man, recounted his harrowing escape from the deluge. Caught in the wave, he was swept off his feet, struggling to breathe as the viscous liquid engulfed him. His survival was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to human resilience in the face of nature's unpredictability. Children too bore the brunt of the disaster. Antonio Di Stasio, just 10 years old, lost his sister Maria in the flood. The trauma rendered him mute, a silent witness to the horrors that unfolded. Such stories underscore the profound psychological scars left by the event. Molasses, often associated with slow movement, defied expectations during the flood. At approximately 35 miles per hour, the wave's speed was astonishing. This rapid movement can be attributed to the molasses' temperature and viscosity. Freshly delivered molasses was warm and less viscous, allowing it to flow more freely. As it cooled, it thickened, trapping victims and complicating rescue efforts. The molasses' non-Newtonian properties meant its viscosity changed under stress. When the tank burst, the sudden release of pressure and the force of gravity propelled the molasses forward with devastating effect. The Great Molasses Flood serves as an early example of industrial negligence leading to catastrophe. Similar patterns emerge in more recent events like the Bhopal gas tragedy in India and the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. In each case, inadequate safety measures, lack of proper oversight, and corporate negligence resulted in loss of life and environmental damage. These disasters highlight the importance of stringent safety protocols and the dire consequences of their absence. The year 1919 was tumultuous for Boston. The city grappled with labor strikes, including the infamous Boston police strike, and a surge in anarchist activities. This atmosphere of unrest contributed to initial suspicions that anarchists had sabotaged the molasses tank. However, investigations later confirmed that structural deficiencies were to blame. The political instability of the time underscored the need for stronger governance and regulatory frameworks to protect citizens. When all was said and done, the Purity distilling tank was never rebuilt. The lot eventually became a train yard, then Langone Park. But Boston's memory of that sticky day endures. Years later, summer air in the North End still might carry a faint, lingering scent of brown sugar, whether from actual leftover molasses or simply folklore. Journalists call it one of Boston's strangest legends. Families pass stories of grandfathers rescued from frozen molasses. In neighborhoods, the disaster became local folklore. Parents warn kids, "Don't eat too much candy, or the whole street might fill up with syrup." Park benches in Langone Park sit exactly where the tank once did. A quiet, green space named after a mayor who grew up nearby. At Popolo Park, A modest plaque by the Bostonian Society tells passers-by the tale. Here on January 15, 1919, a molasses tank exploded under pressure, killing 21 people, it reads. A 40-foot wave of molasses buckled the elevated railroad tracks, crushed buildings, and inundated the neighborhood. Structural defects and a warm day did it, says the Stone. Modern engineers have learned from Boston's sticky lesson. Chemical tanks now have strict codes, and nobody lets a flimsy, leaking silo stand near a city block. The story even seeped into popular culture. From textbooks to board games to sketch comedy, every 10-year anniversary spawns a retelling, each wackier than the last. There is indeed a Molasses cocktail in some bar menu. Yet in your mind, the disaster is forever real. You still feel the thick drag of that wave and the sickly, sweet panic. You remember the taste of panic dusted with powdered sugar, the rumbling and the thunderclap bang. You shake as if from a nightmare, even though those events are etched in Boston's concrete history. The city has since modernized its safeguards, but back then, a simple Saturday lunch hour turned into a nightmare that taught the world how even industrial triumphs can collapse into tragic farce. In the end, maybe that's Boston's lesson. Progress isn't automatic, and sometimes the flip side of sweetness is disaster. But life in this resilient city moves on. In summer, the North End kids still play beneath those same L tracks, chasing pigeons and rolling on the grass in Langone Park, little thinking of the hot, black wave that once filled these streets. The only clue is the faintly sweet scent on a July breeze, a reminder of January's sweetness and the bitter day it all went wrong. The Great Molasses Flood is more than a historical curiosity. It's a cautionary tale about the perils of industrial negligence and the importance of regulatory oversight. The disaster prompted significant changes in engineering practices, including the requirement for professional certification and adherence to safety standards. Today, the site of the flood is marked by a simple plaque, a modest reminder of a day when molasses turned deadly. Yet, the lessons from that day resonate, reminding us that safety should never be compromised in the pursuit of profit. Children of Nix, as we reflect on this sticky chapter of history, may we carry forward its lessons, ensuring that such tragedies remain relics of the past.